Hello, world singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is
Cosmere
Cosmere Conversations.
We have come to the final episode of our Interludes series. We're going to be talking about maybe one of the most exciting interludes today with Rysn.
Yes, I certainly love how we've handled the interludes interspersing the story of Wind and Truth, but also clearly doing a couple of things. And I feel like I want to put it in perspective so that the listener has the same mental map or the mental imagery that you and I are working on. One of the things, like we talked about with Baxel, was putting a bookend or a continuation of things that were brought up previously.
Yeah.
And then another thing was setting up the future of who we think are going to be important characters. Like last time we talked about Lift and Vasher. This episode, I think, is going to fall into the latter. This is, it's a little bit of everything.
It's a little bit of both because Rysn has been, I think, in every Stormlight Archive book. Of course, she also has her own novella, Dawnshard. She's obviously going to be an important or at least recurring character in the Cosmere as we continue to go forward. And that is because of the Dawnshard.
Right. She is a fundamental piece of the entire Cosmere. You cannot have the Cosmere without the Dawnshards.
Theoretically,
we believe. Yeah, theoretically. And perhaps the Dawnshards are going to be a key component in whatever happens in the future regarding the shards themselves. So let's break it down. Let's talk about Rysn's scene. They're sometimes complex, but I think that they're also like one of the more invigorating of the interludes. Like as I was reading, I was just like very excited to be getting the lore drop.
Oh, of course, of course. There is a little bit, maybe like 2 pages or so of kind of contextual information before we really dive into just Dawnshard mania. So we're going to give just a quick overview of kind of the background information, and then most of this discussion will just be around Dawnshards, the new things that we learned, mechanics, and what we know so far. But before we get there, we see Rysn, since her journey in Dawnshard, the novella, and she is growing more accustomed to her Dawnshard given powers like her life sense. She also, of course, still has Chiri, her little pet Larkin that was given to her by one of the Reshi Isles.
Yeah, and Chiri has grown substantially in the in-between periods. The comparison is that now he's like the size of a small axe hound.
Yeah, so more like, I think, like a small dog size, whereas when we first meet Chiri, I'm pretty sure she fits inside Rysn's hand. Like Rysn can hold her in a palm. So a lot of growth for little Chiri. She is said to look like no other creature on Rashar. And the closest thing that she could be said to resemble is a chasm fiend with wings.
We might be able to do an entire episode just on Chiri, but that's not what this one is specifically.
I wish we knew more about Chiri, but I think we're going to learn more about Larkins in the back half, maybe even further past that. But I think there's definitely still some open questions about whether or not Larkins are dragons, are related to dragons, or are something else entirely.
Now, Rysn's story is, of course, about being a merchant. Her Babsk in the early days is training her to follow in his footsteps as like a master merchant, looking for those unique opportunities across the planet for trade. She is in the Reshi Isles trying to earn her stripes when she is permanently paralyzed, waist down, and that's going to then define much of her story. But importantly, for this interlude, it sets her up to develop a fabrial device, a multi-fabrial device, not one fabrial. It's a bunch of
Right.
fabrials working
Yes.
together that allows her to basically have a floating chair.
Yeah, it's their version of like a powered wheelchair, but this floats. It's a hover chair. And as you said, it's a kind of complicated technology, almost like a computer that is putting together a bunch of switches that usually are off on all together to achieve much more complicated motion. This is, of course, also using the discovery of how to use aluminum in fabrials to isolate movement planes. And she's at Urithiru at this time to negotiate some trading contracts and like patent contracts. She really wants to make sure that the discoveries she's making, the technologies she's building are not solely used for war. For example, the fourth bridge, the flying ship,
Mhm.
is using her technology. But Rysn really wants to make sure that there is time and effort that goes into creating and advancing mobility aids and tools for people who need them, not just for creating military technology and weapons.
And this goes all the way back to Dalinar's early question of why are there no shard shovels?
Right. Like, why don't we have inventions for the common people, for like issues that people actually have beyond just killing each other?
And so Risen has her mind locked on that, but also her mind on making some money, like a good Thalen merchant does. Because, yeah, there's negotiations that are happening, and we hear this quote, the Alethi and Urithiru governments owe her and her business partner, one Huio of Kalipa, the demanded royalties upon every device they've begun creating that uses her proprietary designs. End quote.
Yeah, girl's got to protect her intellectual property.
And apparently, Huio is involved with this.
Yes. No spoilers, but it is significant that Huio is involved here. To be more specific about some of the new advances that Rysn has made with this technology, quote, gravity and ocean wave based propellant prototypes, both of which were far more efficient than simply having a track of chulls move your ship, end quote. Of course, we know that at this point, the fourth bridge is being powered by a very complicated network of chulls that need to be in specific places so that they can be moved up and down and back and forward with enough space so that the fourth bridge can move. It's very impractical if you're trying to scale a technology like that. And Rysn has devised a way to do this based on the ocean that is working much more practically. And obviously, the Alethi would like that technology.
Yeah, I am confused what this means. We don't get a, further
Yeah.
description. I am trying to imagine it compared to something that we have here on Earth, which is ocean waved based energy generators. And it operates like a big gigantic generator is down at the bottom of the sea, not like the deep ocean, but like near the shore. And then there is a buoy at the top and it's connected to the generator. And then as the wave comes in, it lifts the buoy up. And then as it falls, obviously goes back and it creates this motion. That type of energy is captured and stored and then transmitted, obviously, back to the land so it can be used. My best guess is that Rysn has done something similar to that. And it's the up and down motion of the ocean waves, which then allows her to manipulate her device based on that movement. That's as much thinking as I can do on it. I'm not an engineer.
Yeah. I mean, that would have to mean that she would have discovered a way to store energy, though.
Not
And
so much the storing. I'm imagining it like, how Kaladin's device in Rhythm of War, it operates on like the big gigantic lifts that go through Urithiru.
yeah.
That's like gravity powered, pretty,
Yeah.
straightforward comparatively. If Rysn had 50
Oh, like
devices.
maybe they're dropping a weight to the bottom of the ocean.
No, just like exactly what I described. Little buoys that are.
Well, but you don't want your hover chair just going up and down and up and down and up and down.
I know. Let me get to the cool part, the explanation.
Okay, well, spit it out.
She's got 50 different of those buoy systems that are constantly in motion. And then her, as you called it, the like little computer network can switch between the sources so that it's always propelling her in the direction that she wants to go. Because it's like giving her forward momentum, and then when she wants to go backwards, it's giving her backwards momentum because the waves are always like transmitting the
That
correct thing.
seems way too complicated.
I
but
don't know what
the- yeah,
ocean
the
wave-based
real-
propellant prototypes means then.
Exactly.
Like it means
real-
ocean-based propellant. She's going forward based on ocean waves. That's all I've got, people.
The real answer is that we don't know.
Mhm.
But again, this is kind of all a backdrop for the real story that happens in this interlude, which is that as Rsyn is here to negotiate these patent contracts, she encounters someone who looks like Dalinar, but is in fact Hoid. Hoid comes into the room that Rsyn is in and, quote, a surging ran through her like a sudden storm on deck. The power of the Dawnshard, her duty and her secret started vibrating with a discordant note. Dalinar's eyes locked on hers. His jaw dropped and his image fuzzed briefly, end quote. So there's this immediate reaction from the Dawnshard that she is holding, and they ask all of their attendants to leave, which is when the disguise completely dissolves, and we see Hoid fully as himself. Important to note, not as Wit. Reminder that his appearance as Wit is somewhat of a disguise. He makes himself appear taller. He makes his hair black. He looks slightly differently to blend in with the culture. And when his disguise completely dissolves, we see him presumably, we don't really know, but I think it's safe to assume that this is actually Hoid as he looks, which is a little bit shorter and with white hair.
Yeah, so the Hoid or Cephandrius, all the many names that we still don't know which is the real one, but definitely not Wit.
Right.
And I think that's important. It may be that it is irrelevant to use those types of simple light weavings or simple type of cloaking of oneself in the presence of another Dawnshard because it would just like override. It's way more powerful than any type. Like he can't fool
Yes.
Rsyn in any way.
Well,
So-
it does seem that he actually is not able to maintain the illusion. Like the power of the Dawnshard, at least the two Dawnshards together, disrupts his illusion that he's always rockin', not just his Dalinar illusion.
And we hear this, quote, he was another one, like her. He held one of the things, the duty and the power. The man before her was a Dawnshard, but they were not supposed to be anywhere near one another. No two had been placed on the same planet, and for a very good reason, end quote. Now, this is conveyed to Rsyn when she is given the power in the first place. We are about to see why that is the case. And we're going to get a demonstration of why it's so dangerous that these two are close together.
Yeah, there's an immediate reaction both from Hoid and from Nickley, the sleepless that has been Rsyn's companion since the events of Dawnshard, and he is sort of shepherding her, helping her through this transition into Dawnshard-dom. We hear, quote, "You found it? But how? And where was it?" And he trailed off as Nickley poured out of the air duct nearby, forming from hundreds of cremlings into the shape of a human being. "Oh, you were involved, of course."
Rsyn, Nickley said, stepping between her and the strange man, do not speak with this one. He isn't what you think. He walked away from his duty centuries ago. He held a Dawnshard once, but now merely bears echoes of it.
"No, Nickley," Rsyn said. "He is one. I can feel it. He is one of the four that you said should never meet. We are here, and we're together," end quote. So Nickley is saying that Hoid at one point was a Dawnshard, but he gave up that power and he simply has sort of the remnant of that power. However, he is clearly currently holding a Dawnshard.
Now, this does line up with what we learned and were to understand regarding the Sunlit Man. And I know that there are different people who read this in a different order, Wind and Truth first, then Sunlit Man, but the publication order was Sunlit Man first. So that's how we read it and consumed it. And at that time, we knew that the Night Brigade was like able to trace the trail of the Dawnshard, and they were like constantly hunting for Nomad, who is, spoilers, but this is all spoilers, Sigil. Basically understanding that the power of the Dawnshard permanently changes and kind of leaves this lingering presence on their holder. So like Rsyn is never going to be the same.
Right.
And Hoid was never the same.
It's like being a sliver of a shard.
I agree.
Yeah.
And so all of this kind of makes sense. And then Hoid introduces his Hoidness.
Uses this
Yes.
to cover up taking up the Dawnshard again. And so Nickley sort of deduces like, oh my gosh, you crafty man, that he took the Dawnshard again, knowing that the signs that would be obvious to a being like a Sleepless would simply be dismissed as these like lingering after effects. And he calls Hoid reckless. Nickley is very unhappy about this situation. And then there is a really interesting thing that Hoid says. He says, quote, "How did this happen? Something this momentous should have shown up in ... And then he gets cut off. Where, Hoid? In where? Where should have this shown up? What are you talking about? How would you have known that Rsyn had taken up the Dawnshard? What, you have like a magical scroll or something that like gives you the day's news? I don't know, but I'm dying to know."
Yeah, he definitely is seeming to hint that there is something that shows momentous occasions,
yeah,
like
that
a
he
new
can like
tap
search.
in. Right. And so I have a couple of theories, but I don't think any of them are accurate. One, based on a previous interlude, the Eerie, the Long Trail. Those people love them some records and some keeping track of different things.
No.
They have full Cosmere awareness. I bet they're jotting down in their little...
Nobody knew that Rsyn took the Dawnshard.
Of course, but he's saying that something would have known or should have known.
Right, like not a human is what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
this would
yeah.
have to be something magical.
The
he
Eerie
would
are
be able
definitely
to
magical. They're
reference.
moving from planet to planet across the Cosmere.
I don't.
But they...
What?
I think that there's another theory that does involve an Isles of the Emberdark spoiler. And so I want to be very clear that we're not going full Isles of the Emberdark spoilers at this moment. But I will say this, and you can skip forward just 30 seconds. In Isles of the Emberdark, there is a force coming out from the area where ambition was shattered.
There's the Knell.
And it's called the Knell. And perhaps the Dawnshards give off a similar type of pulse. And Hoid is saying, like, I should have felt it in that way, in the cognitive realm, like the Knell can be sensed in a certain way. That's my only speculation. Unless you have an immediate response, we'll kind of go back away from that.
Yeah, I think let's move on, because immediately following this, there is a momentous occasion that begins to happen. The Dawnshards start to do something that they refer to as aligning, basically drawing the vessels towards each other with a very strong pull that would essentially destroy these two people. Hoid and Rsyn start to be kind of magnetized towards each other, and basically that force will not stop until their human bodies are destroyed. Rsyn says, quote, "The Sleepless had explained to her what she held, a Dawnshard, one of the 4 core forces by which a god had been shattered. Something beyond common surges, something primal. The 4 had been divided up, never to be brought together lest this happen. The 2 started to pull towards one another," end quote.
And the room is starting to vibrate as, you know, the power is pulsating outwards.
Yeah, the 2 powers are kind of amplifying each other. Rsyn gets pulled out of her hover chair by the force, and Chiri Chiri is kind of writhing around from this strong vibration happening. The vibration also causes the Sleepless to completely unravel. All of their Kremlings like lose continuity and they fall apart. They're kind of not really able to function as a single entity as they usually do.
Yeah, so it's kind of seemingly like the forces have that magnetism attraction, but it's also like breaking down other things. So
Yeah.
almost like
It's like a
matter and
disruptor.
antimatter, or investiture and anti-investiture. There's kind of
Hmm.
like the explosive force when those two things combined.
Yeah, it's reminding me like maybe it's not an opposite. Maybe it is that it is the same sound wave, sort of. And
Well,
so
because
it's,
when Hoid enters, she says that there's a discordant tone.
yeah,
So it's like she's on a certain wavelength
yeah.
and Hoid's on a certain wavelength. But then when they come together, I think those wavelengths start to sync and they don't become
Mm,
discordant.
yeah.
And it's like they are trying to merge together. They want to be
Yeah.
together.
Which is so like we don't have any words, I don't think, that indicate that the Dawnshard were once one thing. Like we don't ever hear about the Dawnshard specifically being shattered. We do hear in that quote that I read that the four Dawnshard were divided up.
But not necessarily that they started as one thing and then were
Right.
divided.
But they clearly want to be together. At least these two do.
Which might point us to an assumption that they were the first division of the shards, not the eventual shards we come to know, but that there was a power of creation, maybe by Adonalsium, maybe by whatever else exists in the Cosmere, that took that power and divided it into four. And it was that division of Dawn that allows other people to know, the 16 plus Hoid who come later, that you can divide up a super powerful godlike entity because it was done previously. And so maybe they learned from the Dawn being split that they could also split Adonalsium. Because I do think we have a word of Brandon that says the Dawn were used to shatter Adonalsium.
Yes, and it's in the quote that I just read. So now it's been like confirmed outside of Word of Brandon.
Right. In the text and Word of Brandon.
Right. That the Dawnshard are the weapon that were used to shatter Adonalsium. I think it's possible that the four Dawnshard exist independently and were never one thing, but that they do belong together, if that makes sense. That like they want to be together, they should be together. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are a single entity, single power, however you want to phrase that.
Yeah, single entity is maybe more interesting. Single power, I understand. Like they're not a single power. At the same time, what we have learned from Wind and Truth is that the power of honor is becoming an entity. Like there is some type of entity developing from that power. If originally there was an entity of the Dawnshards, and then there was the separation of power, maybe the entity remembers, and the entity is the thing that wants to be back together, but the power is divided.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really feel like I don't think that Dawnshards are the same as shards. I think that they are something meaningfully different.
Rather than fractally different, which is what I'm talking about.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Let us know what you think is kind of the meta perspective on Dawnshards and how they fit into the greater Cosmere. What I would love to get to is this quote about Hoid, because it's really important. We have, quote, "The man with the white hair was glowing. He closed his eyes, then held his hands before him and made a gesture with his index fingers and thumbs extended. A sound like a gong in her head was followed by a perspective of vastness, time stretching in all directions, forward, back, even to the sides. And at the center of it, that man, with white hair flaring up from his head and light coming from his core, he snapped his eyes open and spoke. No, the vibrating ceased. The sound went out. The light faded." End quote.
What the heck?
If Wind and Truth didn't have so many epic moments, this would definitely be at the top. It might be still be top 5, but I don't think it's number 1. However, it is so cosmerologically important. This is a demonstration of power that is unlike anything that we've seen. And we saw the birth of retribution.
Like this is such a wild moment that just makes me say, what is Hoid?
Mm-hmm.
And what powers does he have? This is crazy.
Yeah.
The fact that he is able to, at least in some small way, command a Dawnshard?
It definitely seems like a capital C command.
What?
But he also, it's the combination of seemingly a bunch of things. One, he makes a gesture with his index finger and thumb extended. To me, that sounds like a little bit of Elantrian magic, a little bit of writing of...
But he's not writing. He's just making a gesture.
A gesture.
Yeah.
But, he's using some hand magic, okay?
Well, sure.
Yeah,
he's just like making a shape.
Of
he's
course.
He's not like drawing a symbol
but
in
there's
the air.
there's something about the shape. There's something about the hand that he
seemingly
needs to include. Then there is a sound that reverberates out, and Rsyn says that it sounds like a gong in her head. That sound, of course, I think is like similar to Rashar and what we hear all the time about the rhythms of Rashar and the powers of Rashar. There's some type of sound element. And then we have the command, which is very simple, but the word no. And it seems like all of these things, plus the vastness of the universe, are wrapped up into one moment.
It seems almost like Hoid kind of returning to his true essence as this being both like outside of time, but also part of time,
Yes, I do. I think what you're saying is like he is vast and he is still mortal.
Yes.
He is, and that's what I'm trying to get at with like all of these different things going on. Like he's somehow centering himself in this moment with Rsyn.
Yeah.
But also he is the vast, power of the universe that we only see when characters are looking at shards. Like when Dalinar sees Odium.
Yeah.
When Wax is talking to Harmony. There's this concept of like vast...
Infinite.
Yes,
yeah.
Infinite power, infinite space. And here we have it with Immortal.
I guess he is a Dawnshard. So like maybe it's the power of the Dawnshard that is sort of manifesting in this moment. But I think we just always have to keep in mind that we really have not seen Hoid fully as himself. He is always putting parameters on his power, on the investiture that he holds, on who he is, what he is. He's always in disguise. Like the version of Hoid that we see is always only a fraction of what and who Hoid actually is. And I think in this moment, we maybe get the closest that we have to seeing the reality of Hoid.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think it's a little bit like Dumbledore at Hogwarts. Like he's kind of cute. Everybody knows that he's Dumbledore and he's like mildly famous as a wizard. And then eventually like Harry sees him fight. And it is so beyond the capabilities of other wizards. This is now to a degree beyond.
Yeah,
even
magnify that by like 1,000.
Exactly. But you have this kind of perspective that is simplified and I think purposeful. I think like Hoid
of course.
doesn't cast himself as his real self for the exact same reason that we talked about briefly and will continue to talk about. But the reason why spiritual realm Hoid knows that it is a fabrication.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of self-preservation.
Yeah.
That, and I think there's some words of Brandon about this also, that part of what allows Hoid to be so long-lived and not be completely insane like the Heralds is because he's able to store memories in his investiture and kind of manipulate his own consciousness to only be subject to an amount of time that a mortal consciousness can handle. Because any mortal being who's trying to hold whatever 5,000, 6,000 plus, many plus years inside their head are going to be completely insane and non-functioning.
And so this display of power from Hoid, commanding both of the Dawnshards to seemingly resist their innate desire or their innate intent. Again, hard to say with confidence what it actually is, but there's this magnetism and he shuts it down.
And then he says that he's going to make sure that these two people do not meet again, and he leaves the room. So he sort of averts the potential disaster and then takes off. Now, there is fallout from this happenstance. Nickley and his fellow Sleepless recover, and then one of Nickley's companions says, quote, "I can think of few people worse in all the Cosmere to have discovered us," Al-Hal with Ador said.
Nice.
"But it's not your fault. He should never have taken up a Dawnshard again. He who was there when they were used."
"That creature is not one of the gods," Nickley said. "We're hidden still from Odium and the rest. The Mythwalker will not share a secret like this with anyone," end quote. And so another name, I think, is given out to Hoid, which is the Mythwalker.
Yeah, a name that people who have known him for potentially his entire life call him. Like, I think the Sleepless probably know more about Hoid than anyone except maybe the Shard Vessels, and this is their name for him. What does it mean? I want to know.
Could certainly do some speculation, but I will make a note
Okay.
that the Eerie also
Oh my
have
gosh.
this concept of Hoid, and they call him specifically the
They call him the Trickster God.
trickster god.
Yeah, that's different.
I'm just saying they know about his ancient
The Trickster
past.
God, no. They know about him showing up and making trouble in current times. Like, Trickster God makes complete sense to me. I don't know what Mythwalker means.
I mean, he's the man from the stories. He is he's the storyteller and he is the legends in the story. Like, he is everything and nothing. He is, capable of all power with the Dawnshard, and he's also the silly little trickster god. He is Loki at the smallest level, is just like, oh, the younger brother of the cool Thor, Odin's son. And at the same time, he is Loki, he who holds together all of the universe and all of the multiverse. He is Mythwalker. He is Mythrendi.
Okay.
So many fun, different elements of speculation. I think that it's not only because he is a Dawnshard. It is his position over time that is giving him the ability to command. I don't know if Rysn with a bunch of practice is ever going to be able to do what Hoid just did.
No. I think Hoid is unique. And I think the question is, he turned down becoming a shard. I think in order to become something else, what is that thing and how did he go about it? Is my question. I don't think that's a question that we can get anywhere close to answering, but that's sort of where my head is at right now.
I mean, I know what the answer is.
Oh, of course you do.
Of course I do.
Yeah,
of course we do. Of course,
obviously, with absolutely no evidence at all.
I have
you know
all
exactly
of the evidence.
what it is.
100% of the evidence. Hoid wants to be the guy who can push the boulder at exactly the right moment. He doesn't want to be the boulder. He doesn't want to be, trying to stop the boulder and failing. He wants to be the person on the side who can just step in, make a little adjustment, and then step out.
Yes, but that's not an answer.
It is the only answer that we have about Hoid. No, I think that
that's not my question.
You want the mega answer.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have any mega answers.
I know.
Nobody has mega answers. I'm not God.
Okay, but then Rysn sort of after this whole event, she knows in her heart, in her soul, that unfortunately this means that she needs to go into hiding. She has to leave behind her life as a merchant. Kind of up until this point, even though she's a Dawnshard, she is able to live the life that she's always wanted and has been able to do the things that she's wanted to do. I feel really bad for her because first, she's on her merchant journey and she becomes paralyzed, which makes that very different for her. And she's still able to pursue trading, but in a different way for sure. She has to kind of navigate that transition. And then as soon as she has sort of settled into her disability and her new way of embodying the path that she has chosen, she now has to leave it behind again and change and transition and grow in like a new way. And I would love to just read the text about this because there's a few interesting things in here. It's a little bit long, but I think it's worth it. Quote, "The Dawnshards could not be combined, and she could not remain in this land knowing she'd been discovered. She had to leave, perhaps forever, unless there was something she'd been planning, more a fanciful imagining than a true expedition. But perhaps with her ship's new capacities, it appears, Rsyn said, I will not be able to enjoy the exploitation of my patent, and perhaps I do not have to abandon my ship or crew. What happened here was not my fault, but it is my responsibility nonetheless. I will go into hiding, but please consider letting it be in a specific way." As she explained it, they agreed. It was a dangerous suggestion, but exciting nonetheless. She hated being forced into it, but that was that. She would have to go. So, just when everything looked like it was finally building back up and coming together for her, Rsyn prepared to say goodbye. End quote. What do you think her new adventure is going to be?
I think from the words that she uses, leaving forever, an expedition that started as a fanciful imagining.
Yeah.
I think this is her chance long before we get Isles of the Emberdark. I think she's going to go sail the Emberdark. She's leaving with her ship into the cognitive realm to get off of Rashar and not be in this position again.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking maybe she goes on an expedition to the cognitive realm. I guess I don't really know what she knows at this point. Like, does she know about the cognitive realm?
Right. Does she know that there is a shard pool in the Horneater Peaks?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Azure knows that. I assume the Sleepless would have information along those lines.
And the Knights Radiant that we see are obviously familiar with it, but it's hard to tell how widespread that knowledge has become.
Exactly.
I
and
mean,
so, like, she could find out the information.
Yeah, Rysn's hanging out with the Sleepless. Presumably, they've told her a lot of things that even most people on Rashar probably don't know because the Sleepless know everything and have been around forever.
It's tough to say, you know, what I've heard some speculation that she literally flies off the planet because she has a flying chair. She's talking about her ship.
Oh, that she makes the first Rasharan spaceship.
Spaceship, exactly. Now, I don't know if that's the case. It seems so hard to imagine actual planet-to-planet travel at this stage.
I mean, she says her ship has new capabilities, but it seems like a stretch to assume that would be space flight.
Which is why I think it's more likely that she's moving through the cognitive realm.
Right, because if you could move your ship the same way she moves her hover chair, they're not dependent on water in any way to move the ship or wind, etc., the normal ways of sailing a ship.
Yeah, I mean, she might be dependent on water, depending on what these ocean wave-based propellants are. But
yeah, man, if your like fabrial anchors are in the physical realm, can they still connect to your fabrials in the cognitive realm?
That's a very interesting question that I don't think we have the answer to. But I have to assume, yes, she's talking about her ship's advancements and she thinks that she can transition that to something else. If the something else is into the cognitive realm, exploration through the cognitive realm, then I think she believes that those are still connected. I don't know if they, like, I don't have reason to believe that they would or would not be, but I think like span reads operate in the cognitive realm.
Oh, no, because don't they not hold, like, gemstones don't hold stormlight as good as they do in the physical realm? There is a thing about using fabrials in the cognitive realm that is a lot less efficient, I believe.
Yeah, it might be less efficient, and certainly the value of stormlight in the cognitive realm is so high.
Depending on when Rsyn leaves, if she hasn't left by the time
she can leave. Like, and that's the thing is like she needs to leave before retribution is made.
Right. But then even after retribution is made, all of that stormlight would be sucked out of the gemstones, like the other half of the gemstones that her fabrials would be using. So then she would be like stranded in the cognitive realm, which could be a very interesting novella or interlude or whatever.
Isles of the Emberdark Part 2, Rysn
Prelude,
Boogaloo.
Rysn, yeah. I think that we're definitely not done with Rysn. She's still a Dawnshard. I think she is going to keep popping up, hopefully in some really interesting interludes over the next few novels, maybe even get her own additional novellas or something like that. But from here, I want to take this interlude and kind of use this as a jumping off point into more Dawnshard stuff. And then we're also going to use this to jump into our character series from Wind and Truth. Next time, we'll start with Hoid. But for today, I want to end with Hoid's Dawnshard and where that ends up. So towards the end of Wind and Truth, we pick up with Sigzil, who is sitting in Lyryn's office. He's being treated after the Battle of the Shattered Plains and being treated for his incredible grief and trauma at losing his spren, when Hoid bursts in and tells him that the world is ending. In a frighteningly short amount of time, the power that Odium holds is going to identify me as the only thing on the planet that can harm him. The power bears a grudge, even though its vessel has changed. It's going to vaporize me. End quote.
We, of course, do see that play out.
Yes.
It's just the vaporizing is not the end of Hoid.
Interesting that the power of Odium
the power
has a grudge against Hoid.
Yeah. And I do find
So
that
specific.
interesting.
Yeah.
Because the power of Odium has not had that time apart from a vessel. So we don't.
And we know that Hoid and Rysn did not get along. We hear that specifically. But then to hear that also the power is not friends with Hoid.
Yeah. And I just find it a little confusing because I don't know, when does the power actually become an entity? Like the little toddler or whatever, like young teen, that Honor is said to be in the Noadon / whatever. Yeah. But is that true of all of the shard powers? Is it only true because the power of Honor has been without a vessel?
Yeah, Honor is meaningfully different than the other.
Yes,
shards,
meaningfully different.
But
it still seems like one still has like some vibes. Is it just borrowing Rys's vibes?
Yeah, that would be my guess, is that because Rysn held it for so long, it leaves a little bit of an impression on the power.
Right. The power and so it's kind of just like borrowed Rys's mental map and applied it to itself. It doesn't have its own thoughts and feelings.
Right. Yeah, I think it's definitely more like, if someone's mean to your friend, you automatically don't like them, even if they didn't do anything to you.
Of course. Okay. That, that could be a possible answer. It's probably like the correct answer, but there's so many questions when it comes to these powers having choices or able to, make decisions. Anyways, the power has a grudge. Odium is in danger from Hoid.
Yes, of course.
He's going to be vaporized. Then we have this, quote, "I'm holding something incredibly dangerous, something that Odium absolutely cannot get access to, a power more ancient than any of the gods. Do you understand me? I need someone to take it. I need someone to bear it for a short time until I can return for it. It can't be a radiant. It would be too dangerous, too much power in one person's hands." End quote.
This is, of course, Hoid asking Sigzil to take the Dawnshard from him. And we see the ramifications of this in Sunlit Man.
Now, of course, Hoid is not being completely honest with the situation. He says it can't be a radiant, but he is a radiant. He has a bunch of power. And so he's not counting himself in this idea. And
as aforementioned, Hoid is an exception to everything.
But I think what you're saying is something that eventually Sigzil realizes. It's not that it can't be a radiant, as in like the laws of the universe will not allow it. It's that Hoid doesn't want it to be a radiant. Sigzil becomes a radiant.
I think that Hoid has powers that make it safer for him to be a Dawnshard and a Radiant. And we'll dive into this a little bit more again in our next episode, where we actually dive into Hoid and his full storyline in the book. But specifically, he makes mention of having protections for design. So my guess is that those protections would also protect design from any Dawnshard related calamities.
And there are some Dawnshard related calamities in the future for someone that we get the name of and we meet really for the first time. Again, depending on how you went about reading Sunlit Man and Wind and Truth, we saw this character, the Spren Ox or auxiliary, in the Sunlit Man. That is Sigil's Skybreaker Spren, and it's the Radiant he will become when he has already accepted this Dawnshard.
Yes, when we talked about Sunlit Man, we talked a lot about like what is the timeline here? When does Sigil bond Ox and when does he get the Dawnshard and like what order did all of these things happen in? And now we know for sure that the order goes his bond with Vienta, and then that bond is purposefully broken. Then he gets the Dawnshard, then he bonds Ox. We still don't know. Well, I guess we do know. He bonds Ox and then he loses the Dawnshard or he gives it up or whatever.
Right. And in part because of what happens to Ox.
Yeah.
And Ox, in his own right, has got so many different things. I want to call out, at least I learned it from friend Cosmere Quandary, CJ. Ox goes by a number.
Yeah,
originally.
12124, I think.
Yes. And that is, some type of basic code. The first letter of the alphabet is A, the 21st letter of the alphabet is U, and the 24th letter of the alphabet is X. 12124 is spelling out Ox.
It's very cool.
It's so cool. And so that set up that reveal, the devastation that we know is in the future, and this concept of Ox being the Spren that didn't work out for Szeth, that Szeth banishes and like breaks the bond with Ox, only setting up the eventual bond with Sigil and their interrelationship that we're going to see the remnants of in the Sunlit Man.
So Hoid's like, hey man, need you to take this super dangerous thing. Don't worry, I'll come back for it. And then he says, quote, it likes you as much as its ilk can like anything. I don't think it's alive, not like a Spren or the power of the shards. More, it likes you the way a subaxial electron likes a nucleus. End quote.
There's so many nerds out there who are like, oh, I get it. Piece of cake.
I think this actually is a really helpful sort of description of what Dawnshards are, though.
Agreed.
Because as I was saying at the beginning of this conversation, I do not think these are like shards. And Hoid is backing me up. It is much more of a function of like the physics of the Cosmere universe than it is a kind of being like a Spren or even like a shard that has the ability to attain sentience.
But he's also backing up what I was just talking about regarding the power of the shards, the power of odium. He's saying, I don't think it's alive, not like a Spren or the power of the shards. Seemingly comparing Spren and the power of the shards.
Yeah, because
which
Spren
means
are
that all,
made out of the power of the shards.
Which means that all of the power of the shards have some type of sentience. And they're like an entity, even though Odium and Rysn had that relationship the entire time.
To different degrees.
To different degrees, of course. But it does seem like this concept of the power of the shards being their own thing is really, really important.
If you leave the power of the shards, any shard, alone for long enough, it will become its own person.
I think Hoid is saying they're already their own, on their way to being their own person.
Yeah, again, to different degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
if you leave it alone.
We talked a lot about there being sort of a difference between maybe an animal that does have some like thoughts, feelings, desires, but they're maybe not as specific or as complex as
sentience versus sapience.
Right, as something like even a human child. And then obviously you can sort of upgrade that through the ranks.
Of course. And I would say that like it seems like all shards, all the powers of the shards have a sentience. Honor might be upgrading itself because it was left alone for a long time to a sapience.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But it's already weird. We talked about this with Taravangian. There's so many like different ways that he's being pulled in so many directions. When you add in the concept of the power of the shards having their own sentience, it becomes even weirder. Like, it's not just subaxial desires to move towards a certain intent, like what I kind of previously thought was the case between Rysn and
Well, I
Odium the
think,
Power.
yeah, I think there's something in between. I would say that a typical shard is probably somewhere in between a Dawnshard and the power of honor.
A typical, oh, yes, between the Power of Honor. I hear what you're
Yes.
saying. And we have this quote as well, which I think is enlightening. Quote, as a force overlapped him, a vast, strange power, greater than a storm or even a world, but capable of fitting inside a human heart. It was ancient, wonderful, and terrible. It bore a single, all-powerful directive which thrummed through Sigil. Exist, end quote.
We did this a little bit in our live stream episode that we did for patrons, but I would love to, for the general audience as well, sort of speculate about what we think the intents of the Dawnshards are, because now we know that Rysn's Dawnshard is change. This Dawnshard of Hoid and Sigil is exist. And then there are two more. And like, what do we think is going to complete this quartet? My thoughts immediately are, if we have change and we have exist, there must also be something like stop or die. If exist is bringing things into being, change is letting them move in various ways, then there must also be a command to stop.
Yeah, because you have the perspective that exist is not necessarily the same as create.
No, I think it is the same.
Okay, so you,
Yeah.
you think exist is create.
Correct.
And I kind of see exist like preservation. Let me break this down. There is a meta theory that the Dawnshards each have a corresponding 4 shards that apply to them. And so you could theoretically lump the 16 shards, most of which we know the names of, under a Dawnshard, and the Dawnshard would serve as an umbrella. I don't know if that theory is accurate,
Right.
just to be clear.
Yeah.
But that is one of the ways that I'm thinking and trying to conceptualize, how would cultivation fit under these Dawnshards? Would they be exist?
Change.
Would they be change?
Yeah.
I think
Cultivation would be change. Endowment would be change.
And then you would have something like preservation, which is not change by definition. It cannot be change because it wants to preserve. It wants to stay the same.
Yeah.
But you're defining exist to involve creation. And I don't necessarily see preservation as creation. I see it as whatever is created stays the same.
Right. Yeah.
And so I would, want to place preservation under another thing that was closer to maintain some aspect of like not changing, resist entropy.
Well,
basically,
yeah.
the opposite of entropy, whatever the opposite of entropy is, that's where I think preservation fits.
Which is, I think, why I'm saying more that another Dawnshard could be something like stop and like not die, not destroy,
Right.
not don't exist anymore necessarily. Like it could potentially encompass that, like stop existing, but it could also be stop changing.
Yeah. So stop existing, stop changing, resist entropy.
Yeah.
There's kind of like,
But then that would also be preservation. Like preservation is a death in a way, which is why it needs another shard to like accompany it, because on its own, it is a stagnation, which for life usually means death.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly not growth. It's never growth. And that's like bad. You want growth. And that like is something that the vessel of preservation, which is Laris, wants and like recognizes early on. And they're like, I want to create this planet. I want to do it with you, Ati. And like, we will watch these things develop over time because they cannot do that by themselves unless they knowingly have Ati to balance them out. I'm also open to the perspective that the Dawnshards don't have to have that perfect mirroring version of themselves.
Yeah.
And so we could have change and exist, and then we could have something very emotional, which is like love or,
I think it would just be feel.
feel. That
That's
like
kind of my tentative theory, is that the 4 Dawnhards are change, exist,
stop.
stop, and feel.
Interesting. I like these theory. I would love to get some of the feedback from the listeners on what you think the other Dawnshards could be. If you like the meta theory of grouping the shards into a subcategory of the broader Dawnshards.
Or maybe connect. Maybe connect is a better word than feel.
I mean, there's a whole bunch. Like
Yeah.
I'm not locked into what the Dawnshards need to be.
Totally.
And I would probably say I'm also not at the moment caught up in the each shard fits perfectly under one.
Yeah.
Because Brandon has talked about how the shards could have broken in a different way and like been a different shard.
But I think that's the point of the Dawnshards, that they are broad enough
Mhm.
that essentially anything that Ad Nauseam could have split into would have fit into a Dawnshard category or another.
And this also brings me back over to the Aethers and this question of like, are they part of the umbrella category underneath the Dawnshards?
Oh, well,
Do they
we can't-
exist
we can't talk
entirely
about the
outside of it?
Aether.
Of course, but like they are there. They are there underneath us all,
But
like
we
little
don't
mushrooms.
know if they are connected to the system at all, or if they're their entirely own system. So
Of course, we don't
Yeah.
have an answer, but they're there. They can't be ignored. They refuse to be ignored, in
Okay.
fact, because they're a huge part of the future of the Cosmere. And let's wrap this up a little bit with some insights regarding the Dawnshards themselves.
once Sigil takes the Dawnshard, he says, quote, it kept him alive and changed him. He could sense things he had never been able to before. He saw the world in new ways. And then later we hear, quote, he'd been unable to sleep since that day when Wit had given him his burden, end quote.
And he definitely defines it as a burden in the Sunlit
Yes.
Man.
Yes.
And yeah, certainly would not like being a Dawnshard that can't sleep as a mortal who enjoys their sleepy time. That seems like it would do a number on you. And so I don't know how long that lasts. I can't remember if in the Sunlit Man he's ever shown needing to sleep. He definitely needs to like recover, but he's also like way low on his BEUs.
I feel like he sleeps. I could be wrong, but I feel like he does sleep after he gives up the Dawnshard.
So it is a little bit strange that maybe the Dawnshard defines sleeping as not existing. It's like, don't do that. How dare you? You're getting close to not existing and I don't like it. And it keeps him awake. But, you know, the powers of the Dawnshards are certainly incredible. The powers of Hoid are certainly incredible. The powers of Rysn are certainly incredible. And that's where we began all of this. We're using it as a jumping off point to look at Hoid next time. But I think that Rysn, this central character that we have seen every single book and growing in power, having their own novella throughout the first half of the Stormlight Archive.
And she's got Cheery Cheery. She's got the Larkin.
Exactly.
Like, she's definitely going to show up again. She's such a great character.
I'm wondering if it will be in Stormlight Archive 2 or if it will be in their own thing. You know, if something else
Yeah.
entirely.
It seems like she has enough going on
Right.
that she could definitely get her own book. I don't know if Brandon has that capacity, and he's definitely not made any type of statements that will happen. So I think, at least at this point, it's very safe to say that we will be seeing Rysn again, likely in the back half of the Stormlight Archive. I would love to hear everybody else's theories about the Dawnshards. We still don't have a whole lot of information about them. This is legitimately as much information as we have. And yet, I want to hear your theories. I want to hear everything that you think about the Dawnshards, what you think the Dawnshards are, what their intents are. So hit us up on the social medias or over email.
You can always join us over on Patreon, get exclusive access to our Discord. That's where all the best theories and direct communication with Brooke and I can be done. Thank you all so much for listening. And we are very excited about really diving into the characters of Wind and Truth starting next time. Brooke, can you take us away?
Until next time, life before death,
Strength before weakness.
journey before destination.